Silence has a particular sound when a marriage dies. It isn't the weeping, nor the screaming, nor the glass shattering against the wall. It is the scratching of a quill on legal paper, the crackle of a wax seal cooling, and the whisper of black skirts dragging toward the door. Lady Helena Ashworth, or simply Helena as they would insist on calling her after today, kept her back straight as the magistrate read the final terms. Outside, the December fog wrapped London like a shroud, and somewhere in the Ashworth mansion, servants were already packing her belongings into a single trunk. A single trunk. 5 years of marriage reduced to what a maid could carry. But when the study doors opened and Helena crossed the threshold for the last time, something impossible awaited on the gravel path. A golden carriage bearing the Ravenswood emblem, 3 ravens on a silver field, shining under the gray winter light, and standing beside it, the Grand Duke of Ravenswood himself. Chapter 1. The Price of Silence. The magistrate's study smelled of stale ink and male ambition. Helena had memorized every detail of that room during the last 3 months of proceedings. The damp stains on the ceiling that formed a map of non-existent continents, the pendulum clock whose tick-tock dragged half a second behind, and the way candlelight made the sweat on Magistrate Pemberton's forehead shine whenever Lord Ashworth raised his voice. Today, however, her eyes remained fixed on a specific point on the mahogany desk, the document that would dissolve her marriage under the terms of the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857. That law, barely a decade in force, had been designed for men. A husband could divorce his wife for simple adultery, but a woman needed to prove aggravated adultery combined with cruelty, desertion, or some other atrocity the courts deemed sufficient. Helena had no such proofs. What she had was something more valuable: patience, and a husband so anxious to get rid of her that he had made the mistake of bribing witnesses to fabricate the evidence she never gave him. Lady Ashworth, the magistrate cleared his throat uncomfortably. According to the testimonies presented by Lord Ashworth, and given your lack of contestation, this tribunal declares the matrimonial bond dissolved. Lack of contestation. An elegant way of saying that Helena hadn't fought, hadn't cried before the judge, hadn't presented letters, hadn't begged for her reputation. She had simply remained seated with her gloved hands in her lap, while her husband painted her as a cold, indifferent adulteress. The terms of the agreement, Pemberton continued, avoiding her gaze, establish that Lady Ashworth shall renounce all claims on the Ashworth properties, including the dowry of £3,000 brought into the marriage. She will be permitted to keep her personal effects and will receive an annual allowance of— The man paused, consulting the document as if the words burned him. Of £80. £80 a year. The salary of a high-level governess. The price Richard Ashworth had placed on 5 years of her life. Across the room, her almost ex-husband did not hide his satisfaction. Lord Richard Ashworth, Viscount Mereworth, was the kind of man society mothers described as an excellent match. Aristocratic jaw, respectable estate, impeccable manners when there were witnesses. Only Helena knew the other face, the sneer of contempt when they were alone, the silent dinners where her presence was tolerated like a necessary piece of furniture, and the nights he returned as smelling of French perfume and gin, not even bothering to invent excuses. "Does the defendant have anything to declare?" asked the magistrate. Helena looked up for the first time in an hour. Richard was watching her with that half-smile she knew so well, that of a man convinced of his absolute victory. Behind him, his lawyer arranged papers with satisfied efficiency, and in the corner, the young widow Blackwood, the true reason for this divorce, though never mentioned in official documents, waited with false modesty. Declare something. Her only ally in the Ashworth house, the elderly cook, Mrs. Finch, had begged her, "Don't let them destroy you like this." But Mrs. Finch didn't understand. No one understood. Helena parted her lips and spoke the only word she had said throughout the entire proceeding. "I have nothing to add." And there it was again, that gleam of triumph in Richard's eyes, that certainty that he had broken her completely. She could almost hear his thoughts. So simple, so easy to dominate, a little gray mouse who never had the strength to fight. The magistrate stamped the seal, the clock struck 3, and Lady Helena Ashworth ceased to exist legally as a wife. What none of them knew, Not Richard, not the magistrate, not the widow Blackwood, with her satisfied cat smile, was that Helena had never needed to fight, because this defeat was exactly what she had been waiting for 5 years. Chapter 2. The Ghost in Black Silk. Protocol dictated that a divorced woman leave the presence of her ex-husband with discretion. Helena knew that protocol better than anyone. She had studied every rule, every nuance, every little humiliation encoded in the unwritten manual of Victorian society. She knew she must keep her eyes down when crossing the threshold, that she must not speak to anyone unless spoken to first, and that under no circumstances could she afford the luxury of an expression other than absolute neutrality. A divorced woman was a social specter, visible but untouchable, present but ignored, alive but dead for all intents and purposes. So when she left the magistrate's study and felt the gazes of the small group gathered in the foyer, Richard's sister, Lady Constance, with her ostrich feather fan moving in disapproval, the Ashworth butler, who had served false witnesses along with the tea, and 3 or 4 society acquaintances who had come to witness her fall as one attends the theater. Helena simply walked. Her black kidskin shoes barely made a sound on the marble tiles. The dress she wore made of bombazine, that matte fabric widows use for the severest mourning, absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. A deliberate choice. When Lady Constance had sent the message that she was expected to leave the residence with decorum and without provocation, Helena had specifically selected the outfit that most resembled funeral attire. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? A funeral. The burial of a version of herself that had never been real. Helena. Richard's voice reached her just as her hand touched the main door. It wasn't a request for her to stop. It was an order. The tone he used with servants, with horses, with any creature he considered inferior. She stopped not because he commanded it, but because there remained one last act in this play they had performed for 5 years. Turn around. Look at me when I speak to you. Helena turned slowly. The grayish light of the foyer illuminated Richard from behind, turning his aristocratic features into a cutout silhouette. Behind him, the widow Blackwood had emerged from the study, and her fingers, with nails painted a red that respectable women did not use, rested on his arm with possessive familiarity. I want you to understand something, Richard said, taking 3 steps closer. His cologne, too intense, invaded the space between them. There is no coming back from this. No decent house will receive you. No man will look at you twice. You have lost your name, your position, your future. He tilted his head, studying her as one examines an insect before crushing it. Was it worth it, Helena? Your little silent pride. Was this worth it? She looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since their wedding night. Richard Ashworth was 32 years old, had an inherited fortune he hadn't worked a single day to deserve, and possessed the absolute conviction that the universe had been designed for his personal comfort. He believed he had tamed her, that 5 years of indifference and petty cruelties had turned the shy young woman who arrived at his door into this empty woman, this obedient shell who hadn't even tried to defend herself in court. What he never suspected was that Helena Ashworth, the real Helena, the one who existed beneath the silences and lowered eyes, had been watching him all that time, cataloging, waiting. Lord Ashworth, she replied, and her voice sounded strange even to her own ears, clear, without a tremor. I wish you all the happiness you deserve. Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Confusion. Perhaps he had expected tears, pleas, perhaps one last attempt at reconciliation that he could dramatically reject. Not this formal farewell that sounded almost like a sentence. But before he could respond, Helena had already crossed the door. The December air hit her like a freezing baptism. The fog swirled at ground level, turning the gravel path into a river of white smoke. And for a moment, just a moment, Helena closed her eyes and breathed. Free after 5 years, 3 months, and 17 days. Free. Then she heard the sound of hooves on stone, the jingle of silver harnesses, and a male voice that cut through the fog like the tolling of an ancient bell. You took longer than I calculated, little shadow. Helena opened her eyes, and there it was, the carriage that no Ashworth could ever possess. 4 black thoroughbred horses hitched with gold fittings that cost more than Lady Constance's entire jewelry collection. The wheels, painted the same gold as the blazon engraved on the doors, seemed to emit their own light against the opacity of the day. And the shield, 3 ravens flying over a silver field. The House of Ravenswood, the only dukedom that preceded the crown itself in antiquity. Dukedom. Beside the carriage, wearing a gray wool coat cut by the best tailors of Savile Row, and an expression that oscillated between impatience and something that might have been tenderness, the Grand Duke of Ravenswood watched her. "Edmund," whispered Helena, and for the first time in 5 years, her lips formed something resembling a smile. Behind her, in the doorway, Richard Ashworth watched the scene with his mouth open. Chapter 3. The Ravens. Edmund Ravenswood, 5th Grand Duke of his line, had the kind of presence that silenced entire rooms. It wasn't just his height, though he stood a little over 6 feet, which was notable even among the well-fed aristocracy, nor was it the glacial perfection of his features, that combination of sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of tempered steel that had inspired more than one terrible sonnet in London's literary circles. What made people stop when he entered was something harder to name: a stillness, an absolute certainty of his own place in the order of the world, as if every atom of his being knew exactly where it belonged. In this moment, those steely eyes were fixed on Helena with an intensity that would have made men more powerful than Richard Ashworth tremble. "5 years," said Edmund, and his deep voice turned the words into an accusation. "5 years! Helena, do you have any idea what it's been like to maintain this theater for 5 years?" Helena walked toward the carriage, deliberately ignoring the sound of hurried footsteps behind her. Richard, presumably regaining the use of his legs. "You had my letters," she replied. "Once a month, delivered by messengers who changed every time. No return address, no possibility of reply." Edmund opened the carriage door himself, a gesture no duke should ever make according to protocol. Letters that said, and I quote textually, "Not yet, trust me." And did you trust? Did I have a choice? Helena stopped in front of the open carriage door. At this distance, she could see what 5 years had done to her brother: the new lines around his eyes, the hair that had begun to gray at the temples. Though he was barely 30, the permanent tension in the mind of a man carrying too many secrets. "Edmund," she said softly, "I found it." Something changed in the Duke's expression, an almost imperceptible tremor, like the first crack of ice before breaking. "Are you sure?" "Completely." "Helena!" Richard's voice broke the moment. The Viscount had come down the porch stairs and was now approaching with strides attempting to project authority, but only conveying panic. The widow Blackwood followed at a prudent distance, her face a mask of calculating confusion. "Helena, what does this mean?" Richard stopped 5 paces from the carriage, apparently unable to get any closer. His gaze jumped between her and Edmund, searching for sense. "Do you know the Grand Duke of Ravenswood?" Edmund raised an eyebrow. "Know her?" His tone would have frozen tea. "Lord Ashworth, allow me to introduce myself properly, since it seems my sister never took the trouble." "Lady Helena Marianne Ravenswood," Edmund recited, every syllable sharp as obsidian. "Daughter of Alexander Ravenswood, 4th Grand Duke, sister of the current Duke." And until approximately, he consulted his pocket watch with deliberate calm. 37 minutes ago, heir presumptive to the Ravenswood dukedom and a fortune valued at £400,000. The silence that followed was so dense Helena could hear the beating of her own heart. Richard Ashworth had paled to a greenish hue that matched poetically with the mold on the nearby hedge. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound, like an aquarium fish facing concepts too large for its comprehension. The Ravenswood fortune was legendary. Not the new wealth of merchants or industrialists. No, it was the kind of ancient fortune that included lands in 6 counties, an art collection rivaling the royal palaces, and a permanent seat in the House of Lords dating back to the Norman era. The title of Grand Duke, rare in England, had been granted directly by the crown in the 14th century as a reward for services historians still debated. And Richard had treated the sister of that lineage like this. "There must be a mistake," he stammered. "She came to my door 5 years ago with a dowry of £3,000 and letters of recommendation from a minor family in York. Lady Helena Whitmore, they told me, second cousin of an unimportant baronet. Ah, yes. Edmund helped Helena into the carriage with exquisite courtesy. A carefully constructed identity. Documents forged by the best artisans. References manufactured to withstand any scrutiny except the most obsessive. He turned to Richard, and his smile held absolutely no warmth. My sister is meticulous, Lord Ashworth. It is a family trait. But why? Richard's voice had risen an octave, dignity abandoned. Why marry me under a false name? Why live 5 years as a common wife? Helena leaned out the carriage window. The fog swirled around her words, like someone who could observe without being observed. Someone with access to his house, his documents, his private conversations. Richard took a step back as if she had struck him. I don't understand. No, Lord Ashworth. Helena tilted her head, and the gray light illuminated her eyes in a way he had never seen. You never understood. That was always your problem. Edmund got into the carriage and closed the door. The coachman, who had remained motionless as a statue throughout the exchange, raised his whip. Wait, shouted Richard, stepping forward. Wait, if she is a Ravenswood, then this divorce, the conditions, I can contest it. I demand an explanation. The carriage began to move. Lord Ashworth. Edmund's voice floated from the window, casual as if commenting on the weather. I suggest you consult with your lawyer specifically regarding the legal implications of having fabricated evidence of adultery against an innocent woman, and regarding what House Ravenswood traditionally does with those who harm their own. The golden wheels turned on the gravel, the 4 black horses advanced into a trot, and the carriage disappeared into the fog. Behind them, Richard Ashworth remained motionless, the December cold soaking him to the bone, and a new terror, the kind that comes when one realizes they have made an irreversible mistake, beginning to bloom in his chest. The widow Blackwood, who had better survival instincts than her lover, had already disappeared. Chapter 4. Blood Secrets. The interior of the Ravenswood carriage smelled of Italian leather and the lavender their mother had loved. Helena closed her eyes as the vehicle traversed the streets of London, letting the rhythmic swaying and the muffled sound of hooves drag her towards something resembling peace. She didn't remember the last time she had breathed without calculating every inhalation, without measuring the impact of every gesture. 5 years of constant vigilance had left knots in muscles she didn't know she had. You're going to have to tell me everything, Edmund said. Helena opened her eyes. Her brother was sitting opposite her, legs crossed, wearing an expression that combined relief with a frustration that had been fermenting for half a decade. I know. From the beginning, Edmund. From the beginning. Helena leaned forward, and for a moment he looked more like the big brother who chased her through the gardens of Ravenswood Hall than the Grand Duke feared in 3 countries. 5 years ago, you disappeared without warning. You left a 2-line note saying you'd had to do something important and to trust you. Our investigators tracked you to Yorkshire, where you had adopted a false identity and were engaged to a viscount of mediocre fortune and irregular reputation. When I tried to contact you, I received a letter asking me not to intervene, to wait. And you waited, against my better judgment. Yes. Edmund ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Helena had known since childhood. I canceled engagements, invented excuses. Let society assume my sister was traveling the continent for her delicate health. Do you have any idea how many lies I've had to maintain? I have a fairly precise idea, considering I maintain my own. Something in Helena's tone made Edmund pause. He studied her, the paleness of her skin, the dark circles makeup didn't completely hide, the way her shoulders remained tense even now as if expecting a blow. Did he hurt you? He asked, his voice turning dangerously soft. Ashworth, did he lay hands on you? Not in that way, Helena. Not physically, Edmund. She looked out the window where the fog had begun to dissipate, revealing the gray facades of Mayfair. Richard Ashworth is cruel but cowardly. He prefers wounds that leave no marks. Calculated silences, whispered comparisons, the kind of slow erosion that convinces a woman she deserves her misery. Edmund clenched his fists on his knees. I'm going to destroy him. No, Helena turned to him. I am going to destroy him, but not the way you think. The carriage turned onto a wider street and the light changed, illuminating Helena's face from a new angle. Edmund realized with a start that his little sister, the girl who cried when gardeners cut the roses, who spent entire afternoons reading poetry in the greenhouse, was looking at him now with eyes that had seen too much. Edmund, she said, do you remember what Mother told us before she died about Father's accident? The Duke tensed. Helena, I don't think this is the time. It wasn't an accident. The words hung between them like autumn leaves refusing to fall. Alexander Ravenswood, the fourth Grand Duke, had died 7 years ago when his carriage overturned on a mountain road in northern England. He was traveling alone except for his coachman, who also perished. The official inquiry concluded that rains had eroded the road. The wheels gave way. It was a tragedy impossible to prevent. Case closed. But Eleanor Ravenswood, in her last hours of lucidity before the fever took her, had whispered something different to her youngest daughter. She had spoken of letters found in her husband's study, of an investigation Alexander had been conducting in secret, of names and dates and transactions pointing to something dark at the heart of the English aristocracy, and of a man, a viscount from Yorkshire, with connections he shouldn't have, who appeared again and again in those documents. Richard Ashworth, murmured Edmund, finally understanding. Father was investigating Richard Ashworth. Him and others. Helena pulled a small, worn leather notebook from her pocket. Father discovered a network of investors who were funneling funds toward Edmund. This is going to sound insane. After the last 5 years, my definition of insane has expanded considerably. Helena almost smiled. A network of minor nobles financing colonial conflicts unofficially. Weapons, information, even men. All outside government channels. All for personal profit. And Richard Ashworth is one of the principal intermediaries. Edmund took the notebook she offered. The pages were filled with tight handwriting, Helena's script, and pasted documents, receipts, fragments of correspondence, maps with marked routes. You got all this while you were married to him? I had access to his study, to his guests, to the conversations men have when they believe the wife neither listens nor understands. Helena interlaced her fingers on her lap. Richard considered me decorative and useless. Edmund, he never suspected that the woman he ignored at dinner was copying his documents at midnight. The carriage stopped. Through the window, Helena recognized the wrought iron gates of Ravenswood House, the family's London residence. She hadn't been here in 5 years, not since the night as she packed a small suitcase, kissed her mother's portrait, and became someone else. Helena. Edmund's voice brought her back to the present. What you are describing, if it's true, we aren't just talking about financial scandal. We are talking about treason. Ashworth and his partners could end up on the gallows. I know. And you were living with him for 5 years. If this comes to light in the wrong way, they could accuse you of complicity. I know that too. Edmund stared at her. Do you have a plan? I have more than a plan. Helena took the notebook back and put it in her pocket. But I need your help for the last phase, and I need you to trust me a little more. Helena. Edmund, Father died because he got too close without having enough proof. He was direct, confrontational, honest, all the things nobility should be. Her voice hardened. I learned from his mistake. I'm not going to destroy Richard Ashworth. I am going to make him destroy himself. But for that, I need something only you can give me. What? Helena took a breath. I need you to announce my return to society in the most spectacular way possible. I need all of London to know that Helena Ravenswood is back. Edmund frowned. The Pemberton Christmas ball is in 2 weeks. The invitation arrived a month ago, as every year. Perfect. Helena, you will be entering a social battlefield. You are a divorced woman regardless of your true name. Society. Society will see exactly what I need it to see. Helena held his arse. A Ravenswood returned from a mysterious exile, a story too scandalous not to investigate. And when they start asking questions, Edmund, when curiosity outweighs prudence, she left the sentence unfinished. Edmund, who had known his sister since before she could walk, saw something in her eyes that made him feel simultaneously proud and terrified. Are you using the scandal as bait? I am using everything I have. Helena turned to the window, where the doors of Ravenswood House were opening to receive her. Father tried to expose the truth like a gentleman. He died for it. I am going to expose the truth like a society woman. And what does that mean exactly? Helena smiled, an expression that had nothing of the sweetness Richard Ashworth had mistaken for submission. It means, dear brother, that I am going to put on the show of my life, and Richard Ashworth will have a front row seat to watch everything he built collapse. The carriage stopped in front of the main entrance. The family butler, the venerable Mr. Thornton, waited on the stairs with tears barely contained in his eyes. But before Helena could step down, Edmund stopped her with a hand on her arm. Helena, one more thing. Yes? When all this is over, he said, and his voice trembled with an emotion he rarely allowed to show, I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you will let me be your brother again. Not your accomplice, not your financier, not your political connection. Your brother. He squeezed her hand. These 5 years without you have been… Helena, I don't know how to explain it. It was as if a part of me was missing. Helena felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had pulled tight for so long she had forgotten it existed. I promise, she whispered. Edmund nodded once sharply and then opened the carriage door with the recovered composure of a duke. Then Lady Helena Ravenswood, he announced loudly so the gathered servants could hear. Welcome home. But as Helena descended the stairs toward the open arms of the staff who had watched her grow up, a question floated in her mind like an approaching storm cloud. What would Richard Ashworth do when he discovered his ex-wife had not only deceived him for 5 years, but held in her hands the evidence to destroy everything he valued? And more importantly, how long would it be before he tried to destroy her first? Chapter 5. The Art of Resurrection. 2 weeks can be an eternity or a sigh, depending on how they are measured. For Helena, the 14 days separating her return to Ravenswood House from the Pemberton Ball passed in a meticulous choreography of preparation. Each morning began before dawn, when the winter light barely tinged the curtains of her room gray, and ended long after midnight, eyes burning over documents and fingers stained with ink. There was so much to rebuild, so much to remember, so much to pretend to have forgotten. The dressmaker arrived on the 3rd day, Madame Delacroix, the same woman who had dressed her mother for the last royal ball before her illness. The elderly Frenchwoman had wept upon seeing Helena, murmuring in her native tongue about ghosts and miracles before recovering her professional composure and beginning to take measurements with fingers that still did not tremble despite her 70 years. Non, non, Madame Delacroix had said when Helena suggested a discreet dress, something that wouldn't draw too much attention. You have been dead to society for 5 years, ma chérie. One does not return from the grave with whispers. One returns with thunder. And so the dress now hanging in Helena's wardrobe was a declaration of war, wrapped in silk. The color was eau de Nil, that pale greenish blue evoking the submerged temples of the Nile, which only the boldest women dared to wear. The skirt, built over a flexible steel crinoline, the latest innovation replacing heavier horsehair structures, fell in cascades of fabric that whispered with every movement. The bodice, fitted along the lines of the cuirasse bodice, dominating current fashion, molded Helena's figure into a silhouette that was simultaneously appropriate and devastating. But the most important detail was not visible to the naked eye. Embroidered in silver thread along the inner hem where no one except Helena could see them, 3 small ravens flying in formation upward, the Ravenswood emblem, hidden but present, a private reminder of who she really was. The carriage will be ready in an hour, milady. The voice of Martha, the maid who had served Helena since childhood and kept the secret of her whereabouts for 5 years, brought her back to the present. Helena looked at herself in the full-length mirror of her dressing room, almost unrecognizable to the woman staring back. During her time as Lady Ashworth, she had deliberately cultivated a nondescript appearance, dresses of dull colors, severe hairstyles, modest jewelry that invited no comment. She had learned to walk without making noise, to sit without taking up space, to exist in the margins of every room like a useful but ignorable piece of furniture. The woman in the mirror had nothing ignorable about her. Martha had worked for 3 hours on her hair, creating an elaborate updo incorporating braids, strategically loose curls, and small diamond pins that captured the light like frozen dewdrops. The makeup, applied with the subtlety distinguishing ladies from courtesans, highlighted the cheekbones Helena had inherited from her mother and slightly darkened her eyes, giving them a mysterious depth. And around her neck, the necklace she hadn't worn in 7 years. The Ravenswood tear, a sapphire the size of a grape surrounded by smaller diamonds, hanging from a platinum chain so delicate it seemed to float on her collarbone. The stone had belonged to her great-grandmother, then her grandmother, then her mother. It was, along with Edmund's ducal ring, the most recognizable jewel of the Ravenswood family. Anyone seeing her tonight would know exactly who she was. "Are you nervous, milady?" asked Martha, adjusting a final curl. Helena considered the question. "No," she replied finally. "I think I am impatient." The maid smiled, an expression containing 5 years of shared secrets. "Then go and show them all what they missed." Helena took her gloves, white silk to the elbow, as etiquette dictated for formal events, and put them on with practiced movements. The clock on the mantel struck 8. The ball began at 9, but the arrival of a Ravenswood required precise calculation. Late enough for the room to be full of witnesses, early enough for the news to spread before dinner. She descended the stairs of Ravenswood House with measured steps, conscious of every rustle of silk, every flash of the sapphire under the gas lamps. Edmund waited for her in the foyer, impeccable in his black tailcoat and gray silk vest, holding the ebony and silver cane that had belonged to their father. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "Since 5 years ago." Edmund smiled, a rare expression for him that Helena treasured as evidence her brother still existed beneath the title and responsibilities. "Then let's remind London who the Ravenswoods are." The golden carriage waited outside, shining under the streetlights like a promise of things to come. Chapter 6. The Hall of Whispers. The Pemberton Mansion was a monument to the ambition of 3 generations. Built in the heart of Mayfair by the grandfather of the current Lord Pemberton, a spice merchant who had bought his title with profits from the East India Company, the house tried to compensate for its common origins with an opulence bordering on aggressive. Murano glass chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with mythological scenes. Italian marble covered every horizontal surface, and the ballroom, famous throughout England, could hold 400 people without anyone having to rub elbows. Tonight it was full to the last corner. The Pemberton Christmas Ball was the event of the winter season. Not attending was admitting one hadn't received an invitation. Not being seen was confirming one had fallen from grace. The oldest families mingled here with the nouveau riches. Politicians courted industrialists, and mothers evaluated marriage prospects with the efficiency of generals planning campaigns. When the butler announced, "His Grace the Grand Duke of Ravenswood and Lady Helena Ravenswood," the effect was similar to a stone falling into a calm pond. The murmur began in the front rows and expanded backward in concentric waves. Helena could feel the eyes fixed on her, some curious, some hostile, some calculating, as she descended the staircase on Edmund's arm. Every step was a statement, every inch of her eau de Nil dress a challenge to those who had presumed her reputation dead. The Duke's sister, the missing one, the one who married in secret and divorced in scandal. Helena imagined the thoughts behind those aristocratic eyes. 5 years of absence had generated wild speculations, that she was mama and secluded in a sanitarium, that she had an illegitimate child and lived in exile, that she had died and the family hid it. The reality that she had spent half a decade as the ignored wife of a minor viscount was simultaneously more mundane and more extraordinary. "Ravenswood!" Lord Pemberton approached to receive them, his round face shining with nervous sweat. The host clearly hadn't anticipated this social complication. What an unexpected honor. "And Lady Helena, we had heard you were, that is, rumors circulated." "The rumors of my disappearance were considerably exaggerated, Lord Pemberton," Helena replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "As you can see, I am in perfect health." Yes, yes, of course." The man wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. There must be a fascinating story behind your travels." A story for another time, perhaps. Edmund intervened with the natural authority of someone used to ending uncomfortable conversations. For now, my sister simply wishes to enjoy her return to London society. I am sure your guests will be welcoming. The emphasis on the last word left no doubt about the consequences of the contrary. Lord Pemberton nodded repeatedly and moved away, doubtless to alert his wife about the protocol crisis that had just landed in her ballroom. That was cruel, murmured Helena, as Edmund guided her toward the perimeter of the dance floor. Pemberton owes our family bank £40,000. He can withstand a little discomfort. Edmund, yes, thank you. Her brother didn't respond but squeezed her hand slightly on his arm. It was enough. The next 30 minutes were an exercise in diplomacy under fire. Helena received greetings ranging from effusively hypocritical, Lady Wington, who had spread the worst rumors about her disappearance, now declared she had always known there was a reasonable explanation, to openly hostile. The look of contempt from the Countess of Blackwood, mother of the widow who had replaced Helena in Richard's bed, could have frozen champagne. But Helena had expected this. She had rehearsed every response, every calibrated smile, every inclination of the head communicating exactly the right level of aristocratic superiority. She wasn't the shy wife who had entered the Ashworth house 5 years ago. She was a Ravenswood, and Ravenswoods didn't ask permission to exist. It was then that she saw him. Richard Ashworth had arrived late, a common tactic among those wanting to make a notable entrance. Dressed in a tailcoat, Helena knew the real state of his finances better than he did. He entered on the arm of the widow Blackwood, their presence announced with fanfare reserved for distinguished visitors. The widow wore a red dress bordering on scandalous, with a neckline defying both gravity and decency. Resting on her chest was a ruby necklace Helena recognized immediately. It had belonged to Richard's mother, one of the few family jewels she had genuinely admired during her marriage. How quickly things are replaced, Helena thought, in people. Richard hadn't seen her yet. He was busy greeting acquaintances, projecting the image of a man without worries, a viscount enjoying his newly acquired freedom. The widow hung on him with possessive familiarity, marking territory against any other woman who might have ideas. Helena waited. The moment came when Richard turned to accept a glass of champagne from a passing servant. His gaze swept the room automatically. The habitual scan society men did to identify allies, rivals, and opportunities. His eyes passed over her once, twice, and on the third time they stopped. The champagne glass trembled in his hand. Helena tilted her head in a minimal greeting, the kind given to distant acquaintances, not ex-husbands. The light of the chandeliers caught the sapphire at her neck, sending blue flashes across the space between them. Richard paled. The widow Blackwood, following his gaze, saw her too. Her expression went from confusion to recognition to something that might have been fear in rapid succession. "Edmund," murmured Helena, "I think we have his attention." "So it seems," replied her brother, who had also noticed the exchange. "Ready for the next act?" "More than ready." As if choreographed, the orchestra chose that moment to begin the opening bars of a waltz. Couples began to form on the floor, and Lord Hartington, a respectable widower Edmund had recruited specifically for this purpose, appeared before Helena with an impeccable bow. "Lady Helena, would you grant me the honor?" Helena accepted his hand and allowed him to guide her toward the center of the ballroom. She could feel Richard's eyes following her every move as she glided among the other couples, her dress creating swirls of green at her side that looked like waves breaking on an impossible coast. Lord Hartington was a competent and discreetly attractive dancer, exactly the kind of partner who would fuel rumors without generating scandal. As they spun, Helena caught fragments of conversations around her. "They say she was on the continent all this time. The divorce was his idea, but look who came out winning. The Ravenswood necklace. My mother saw it once on Duchess Eleanor." Perfect. The narrative was writing itself. When the waltz ended and Lord Hartington returned her to Edmund's side, Helena noticed Richard had disappeared from where he was before. She scanned the crowd discreetly until she found him by one of the ballroom columns, alone. The widow, apparently discarded, stood with an expression mixing rage and something harder to identify. Regret? Fear? Helena hoped it was both. "He's coming this way," muttered Edmund. And indeed, Richard Ashworth had begun to move through the crowd with the determination of a man who has made a reckless decision and is too committed to back out. Helena composed her face into a mask of serene indifference. Let him come, she thought. This is exactly what I planned. Chapter 7. The Weight of Masks. Richard Ashworth stopped 3 steps from her, close enough to speak without shouting, but far enough to maintain an appearance of decorum. Around them, the party continued, couples dancing, groups chatting, servants circulating with silver trays. But Helena could feel the attention of dozens of guests shifting subtly toward them. In the drawing rooms of the aristocracy, real drama was always more entertaining than music. Helena, Richard said, and his voice had an edge she knew well. It was the tone he used when trying to regain control of a situation slipping away from him. What an unexpected pleasure to find you here, Lord Ashworth. She pronounced his title with the same distant courtesy she would have used with a serenator. I trust you are enjoying the evening. Don't pretend this is a coincidence. He took half a step closer, lowering his voice. What game are you playing? Edmund tensed beside him, but Helena touched his arm lightly, a signal to wait. I am not playing anything, Lord Ashworth. I am simply attending a ball my family has been invited to for 3 generations. If my presence makes you uncomfortable, she let the pause stretch. Perhaps you should consider why. A muscle twitched in Richard's jaw. Under the chandelier light, the lines of tension in his face were clearly visible. The dark circles, male makeup didn't entirely hide. The stiffness in the shoulders of a man who hadn't slept well in days. Good, Helena thought. Let him lose sleep. We need to talk, he said, in private. I don't believe we have anything to discuss that hasn't already been said in court. Helena. Richard exhaled, and for a moment, just a moment, something resembling honesty crossed his features. I don't know what you are planning. I don't know why you did what you did, why you married me under a false name, why you waited 5 years for this, but I know you. I know nothing you do is accidental. You don't know me, Helena thought. You never took the trouble to try. But what she said was, Lord Ashworth, I am flattered you think my decisions have some hidden meaning, but the truth is much simpler. She moved half a step closer, close enough that only he could hear. I married you because I wanted to escape my family's expectations. I remained married because divorce would have caused a scandal I wasn't prepared to face. And now that you have had the kindness to release me, the word dripped irony. I am simply resuming the life I left behind. Richard studied her with narrowed eyes. She could see the questions piling up behind his expression. Why not reveal her identity sooner? Why accept the divorce on such unfavorable terms? What had she gained from 5 years of anonymity? Questions for which Helena had answers, but which she did not intend to give him. I don't believe you, he said finally. That is your problem, not mine. If I discover you are plotting something, are you threatening me? Helena arched an eyebrow, an expression she had perfected watching her mother handle difficult men. Here in public? In front of 300 witnesses, including 3 members of Parliament and the editor of the Times? Please, Lord Ashworth, I thought you were smarter than that. Rage flashed in Richard's eyes, red and dangerous. For a second, Helena saw the man existing beneath the civilized mask, the one who broke things when frustrated, who used words like knives, who had turned their marriage into an exercise in calculated cruelty. But they were in public. Rules applied. This isn't over, he hissed. On that, we agree. Richard took a step back, recomposed his expression into something that could pass for courtesy, and walked away toward where the widow Blackwood waited with evident anxiety. Helena didn't follow him with her gaze. Instead, she accepted the glass of champagne Edmund offered and drank a long sip, savoring the bubbles against her tongue. That was intense, her brother commented. It was necessary. Do you think he suspects? Helena considered the question while watching the dancers spin under the chandeliers. The music had changed to a livelier polka, and conversations around them had regained their normal volume. The drama apparently resolved, at least for now. He suspects there is something more, she said finally. But Richard has always underestimated women. He will assume it is something emotional, jealousy, revenge, the desire to humiliate him publicly. It will never occur to him that my motives are practical. In the next phase, Helena finished her champagne and placed the empty glass on a passing servant's tray. The next phase requires him to make a mistake. And for that, her gaze found Richard across the room, where he was now conversing tensely with the widow Blackwood. I need him to feel cornered. Helena, Edmund took her elbow, guiding her toward a less crowded corner. Before this goes any further, I need to ask you something. Ask. What do you really want from all this? Not the official answer, not the strategy. You. What does Helena Ravenswood, the person, want? It was a question she had avoided asking herself for 5 years. A question requiring her to look beyond plans and documents and sleepless nights towards something rawer and less controllable. I want, she began, surprised her voice trembled slightly. I want someone to pay for what they did to Father. I want the truth to come to light. I want Richard Ashworth and everyone involved in that network to face consequences. And after, Helena fell silent. After was a concept she had stopped imagining long ago. Her entire existence had been reduced to this goal, to this carefully orchestrated revenge. What remained when the revenge ended? I don't know, she admitted. Perhaps I can find out when all this is over. Edmund looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression reminded her of their father, that mix of concern and pride Alexander Ravenswood had reserved for moments when his children surprised him. Then let's finish this, he said. But Helena, promise me you won't lose yourself in the process. Before she could answer, a murmur ran through the ballroom. Heads turned toward the entrance where a new guest had just been announced. Lord Sebastian Thorne, Earl of Westbrook. Helena felt the air leave her lungs. Sebastian Thorne, the name appearing next to Richard's in every incriminating document. The true architect of the network she had discovered. The man who, according to her father's letters, had given the order resulting in the accident that killed Alexander Ravenswood. And now he was here, less than 20 meters from her, with a charming smile and eyes promising nothing good. Edmund, whispered Helena, did you invite him? No. Her brother had gone pale. Pemberton didn't either, according to my sources. He arrived unannounced. Lord Thorne scanned the room with the practiced ease of a predator evaluating territory. His eyes passed over the crowd, stopped briefly on Richard, who looked as surprised as everyone else, and finally found Helena. He smiled, a smile that said, as clearly as if he had shouted it, I know who you are. I know what you seek, and you have made a terrible mistake coming here tonight. Helena returned the smile with a calm she didn't feel. The game had just become much more dangerous. Chapter 8. The Wolf Among Sheep. Lord Sebastian Thorne walked like a man who had never known doubt. Helena watched him cross the ballroom with the precision of a surgeon. Every step calibrated, every smile distributed with exact economy, every pause calculated for maximum effect. Guests parted in his wake, not out of deference, but because of something more primitive. The ancestral instinct that makes prey recognize a predator, even if they have never seen one before. The Earl of Westbrook was 43 years old, though he looked younger. His dark hair barely showed strands of silver at the temples, and his features, angular, almost beautiful in a way that was hard to look at directly, betrayed none of the cruelties Helena knew he had committed. He was the kind of man novels described as magnetic, though a more accurate term would have been dangerous. He had inherited his title at 21, when his father died in circumstances no one had investigated too thoroughly. Since then, he had built a fortune rivaling that of much older families, using methods Alexander Ravenswood's documents detailed with chilling precision: arms smuggling to colonial conflicts, bribes to customs officials, and the systematic elimination of anyone threatening his operations, including apparently curious dukes who asked too many questions. Lady Helena Ravenswood, said Thorne, stopping in front of her with an impeccable bow. What an extraordinary pleasure. I had heard rumors of your return, but rumors rarely do justice to reality. His voice was velvet over steel. Helena felt a chill run down her spine, but kept her expression serene. Lord Thorne, I didn't know you frequented the Pemberton balls. Oh, usually I don't. His eyes, a gray so pale they seemed almost transparent, did not leave hers. But when I heard that a certain lady had resurfaced from a mysterious exile, my curiosity overcame my aversion to crowds. Edmund took a step forward, positioning himself slightly between them. "Thorn," he said, and his tone contained none of the usual courtesy between peers. "I don't recall seeing you in years." "Ravenswood," the Earl tilted his head in minimal acknowledgement. "I have been busy with matters abroad, but news from London always reaches me eventually, especially interesting news." There was something in the way he pronounced that last word that made Helena tighten her fingers around her fan. He knows, she thought. Perhaps not everything, but he knows enough to be here tonight. "I fear my return is not particularly interesting," she replied, forcing lightness into her voice. "I simply decided I had spent enough time away from my family." "Is that all?" Thorne cocked his head, studying her with the intensity of an entomologist examining a rare specimen. "Because I understand the last 5 years were eventful. A secret marriage under a false name, a scandalous divorce, and now a social resurrection that has all of London murmuring. A common woman would have been destroyed by half of that. But you are here wearing the Ravenswood tear, dancing waltzes as if nothing happened. That suggests there is more to this story than meets the eye." "Lord Thorne," Edmund intervened, his voice glacial, "it seems to me you are being impertinent with my sister." "Impertinent?" The Earl raised his hands in a gesture of feigned innocence. "I simply express admiration. Lady Helena has demonstrated notable resilience. It is a quality I have always appreciated." Helena felt the threat beneath the words. Thorne wasn't here by chance, and he certainly wasn't here to exchange empty pleasantries. He had come to evaluate her, to determine how much she knew and how dangerous she was, which meant someone had alerted him. Her gaze sought Richard across the room. The Viscount was by a column watching the exchange with an expression mixing confusion and something that might have been fear. The widow Blackwood had disappeared from his side, probably taking refuge in the ladies' powder room, far from the drama she clearly didn't understand. Had it been Richard who contacted Thorne? Or did the Earl have his own sources of information? "Lord Thorne," said Helena, making a decision, "would you grant me the next dance?" Edmund looked at her with barely disguised alarm, but she touched his arm lightly, the same signal as before. "Trust me." Thorne's smile became genuine for the first time, though no less dangerous. "It would be an honor, Lady Helena." The orchestra began the opening bars of a Viennese waltz, faster and more complex than the previous one, requiring closeness and precise coordination. Thorne offered his hand, and Helena accepted it, allowing him to guide her onto the dance floor. The contact was like touching ice wrapped in silk. "Interesting strategy," murmured Thorne as they began to spin, approaching danger instead of fleeing from it. "I find fleeing rarely resolves anything." "Is that what you learned during your stint as Lady Ashworth?" His eyes shone with cruel amusement. "I must admit, when Ashworth told me about his wife, I never imagined she was a Ravenswood in disguise. The poor man had no idea who he had married." So Richard did tell him, Helena thought, probably in panic, seeking advice or protection. "Richard was never particularly observant," she replied, "one of his many limitations. And yet you chose to spend 5 years with him." Thorne spun her expertly, his movements so fluid they seemed rehearsed. "That suggests you had deeper reasons than a simple desire to escape your family. What were you looking for exactly, Lady Helena?" The moment of truth. Helena could lie, deflect, feign ignorance, but something in Thorne's expression told her it would be useless. This man hadn't survived 2 decades in the treason business by being easy to fool, so she decided to do something unexpected. Tell the truth, or part of it. "I was looking for information on my father's death." Thorne's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her waist. "Alexander Ravenswood died in a carriage accident. That was officially determined." "Official determinations can be bought, Lord Thorne. You should know that better than anyone." For the first time, something that wasn't amusement crossed the Earl's features. It was brief, a flicker of calculation, a reevaluation. But Helena saw it. "Be careful, Lady Helena." His voice lowered until it was barely audible over the music. "Unfounded accusations can be dangerous." I haven't made any accusations. I simply observed that my father was investigating something before he died, and that you appear mentioned in his notes frequently. The waltz carried them toward the center of the floor, away from curious ears. Thorne maintained his smile, but his eyes had turned calculating, evaluating. Let us suppose, hypothetically, that were true, he said. What would you hope to achieve with that information? Justice, Warmel. Justice is a flexible concept, Lady Helena. What you call justice, others might call revenge. And revenge, he spun her again, more sharply this time. Revenge tends to destroy those who pursue it as much as its targets. Thank you for the warning. It is not a warning. It is an observation based on experience. Thorne leaned his head toward her, his lips close to her ear. I have seen many people try what you are trying. All failed. Some died in the process. Others simply disappeared. The chill running through Helena this time wasn't feigned. You are threatening me, Lord Thorne. I am being honest, a rare gift in these circles. The music began to slow, nearing the end of the waltz. You have two options, Lady Helena. You can abandon whatever investigation you are conducting, burn your father's notes, and live the rest of your life as the recovered sister of the Grand Duke. No one will bother you. You have my word. And the second option? Thorne's smile became almost paternal, which made it more terrifying. The second option is to continue down the path you have chosen and discover, as your father discovered, that there are forces in this world against which lineage and fortune offer no protection. The waltz ended. The dancers applauded politely, preparing for the next piece. Thorne released her hand and took a step back, his mask of courtesy perfectly restored. It has been a pleasure, Lady Helena. I hope you seriously consider what we have discussed. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd with the same ease with which he had appeared. Helena remained motionless in the center of the dance floor, surrounded by couples forming for the next dance, her heart beating against her ribs like a trapped bird. Edmund appeared at her side in seconds. What did he tell you? Helena looked at him, and for the first time in 5 years, allowed fear to show on her face. He told me the truth, she whispered. And that means I just made a terrible mistake. Chapter 9. The Hour of the Ravens. The Ravenswood carriage left the Pemberton mansion before midnight. Helena had insisted on leaving immediately after the encounter with Thorne, claiming a sudden indisposition no one questioned. A woman newly reintegrated into society, overwhelmed by the emotions of the moment, was a perfectly acceptable excuse. Edmund had distributed polite farewells while she waited in the foyer, controlling the trembling of her hands with sheer willpower. Now, in the darkness of the carriage, with the lights of London passing like golden ghosts through the windows, Helena finally allowed herself to think. She had underestimated Thorne. She had assumed she could control him the same way she had controlled Richard, staying in the shadows, gathering information, moving pieces without anyone knowing there was a board. But Thorne wasn't Richard. Thorne was the kind of man who built the boards, who wrote the rules, who eliminated players who became inconvenient, and she had just revealed herself as a player. Helena, Edmund's voice brought her back to the present. I need you to tell me exactly what is going on. She nodded slowly. There was no reason to hide anything anymore. Not from Edmund, not after tonight. Father discovered an arms smuggling network, she began. British nobles financing conflicts in African and Asian colonies, selling rifles and ammunition to both sides of local wars, maximizing profits while thousands died. Richard Ashworth was one of the minor intermediaries. He handled the money, forged shipping documents, collected commissions. But the head of it all, the architect, was Sebastian Thorne. Edmund listened in silence, his face a mask of stone. Father gathered evidence for 2 years, Helena continued. He had documents, testimonies, bank records. He was weeks away from presenting everything to the Home Office when his carriage overturned on that mountain road. Do you think Thorne killed him? I think Thorne ordered him killed, and I think Richard Ashworth knew enough to be complicit, though perhaps he didn't participate directly. The words hung between them, heavy as lead. That's why you married him, Edmund said, finally understanding. To access his documents, his contacts, his secrets. Mother told me everything before she died. Father's suspicions, the names, the connections. Helena took off her gloves, exposing hands that still trembled slightly. I knew that if a Ravenswood began investigating openly, Thorne would be alert. But an insignificant woman, an ignored wife, could go places no official investigator would ever reach. 5 years, Helena, 5 years living with a man you despise, pretending to be someone you aren't, risking everything. It was necessary. And now what? Edmund leaned forward, frustration evident in every line of his body. Thorne knows you exist. He knows you have information. How long do you think it will be before he decides you are a problem that needs to be solved? Helena didn't have an answer. For 5 years, she had operated under the assumption she would remain invisible until the moment to act. But the confrontation with Richard, the ball, the meeting with Thorne, every step had been more public than necessary. Why? Pride? The desire to see Richard's face when he discovered the truth? Stupidity, she told herself. Vanity disguised as strategy. The documents, she said suddenly. I need to secure the documents tonight. Where are they? In 3 different locations. Copies in a safety deposit box at the Bank of England under a false name. Originals in a hiding place I prepared years ago at the Ashworth Country House. Richard never knew it existed. And a third set, she hesitated. A third set is with someone trustworthy. Who? I prefer not to say. Not because I don't trust you, Edmund, but because if Thorne decides to interrogate you, it's better you don't know. The carriage turned toward Mayfair, approaching Ravenswood House. Helena could see the gaslights illuminating the Georgian facade, servants probably waiting for her return with hot tea and discreet questions about the evening. Tomorrow, said Edmund, I will contact Lord Blackwell at the Home Office. He is an old friend of Father's, someone we can— No, Helena cut him off. If we involve the government now, Thorne will have time to destroy evidence, bribe witnesses, disappear. It's exactly what he would expect us to do. Then what? We need something faster, more public, something he can't bury. What are you suggesting? The Times. Lord Harrington? He is the editor, and he owes our family a favor since Father helped him with that libel matter 10 years ago. You want to publish everything in the newspaper? I want to give Harrington enough information to start investigating on his own. Journalists asking questions, following leads, publishing articles. Thorne can't make the entire Times disappear. And once the story is in circulation, any accident that happens to me will look extremely suspicious. Edmund weighed the proposal for a long moment. It's risky. Everything is risky from now on. And if Harrington doesn't cooperate, he will cooperate. Helena allowed herself a small smile. I have documents proving 3 members of Parliament are involved in Thorne's network. For a journalist, that is the kind of story that defines careers. The carriage stopped in front of Ravenswood House. The butler, Mr. Thornton, was already opening the main door, his silhouette outlined against the foyer light. Edmund took Helena's hand before she could step down. Helena, whatever happens from here on, I want you to know I am proud of you. Father would be proud. She felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had carried since the night she decided to become someone else. Thank you, Edmund. Now let's go inside and plan how to destroy Sebastian Thorne. Helena nodded and descended from the carriage. The London fog enveloped her immediately, cold and damp, but she barely felt it. Because as she climbed the steps of Ravenswood House, her mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating moves, anticipating responses, preparing for the battle that would define everything she had fought for over 5 years. The Ravenswood Ravens were about to fly, and when they landed, nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 10. The Price of Truth. Lord Harrington received Helena in his private office 3 days after the ball. The Times building in Printing House Square was a labyrinth of narrow corridors, cluttered desks, and the constant roar of presses in the basement. The smell of fresh ink permeated every surface. Messengers ran between departments with perpetual urgency, carrying galley proofs and breaking news. The editor's office was an oasis of relative order amidst the chaos. Walls lined with books, a massive oak desk covered in documents, and windows overlooking an inner courtyard where gray pigeons fought over breadcrumbs. Thomas Harrington was 62 years old and had the look of a man who had seen too much of the world to be easily surprised. He had covered wars, scandals, revolutions, and the fall of empires. He had survived in 3 assassination attempts, 2 libel suits, and a disastrous marriage. And now, sitting across from Helena Ravenswood, with a cup of tea cooling beside him, he listened in silence as she laid out 5 years of investigation. "Let me make sure I understand correctly," he said when she finished. "You are accusing Lord Sebastian Thorne, Earl of Westbrook, of orchestrating an arms smuggling network that has financed conflicts on 3 continents. You are also accusing your ex-husband, Lord Richard Ashworth, of participating as a financial intermediary. And you claim to have documents implicating several members of Parliament." "Correct. And you believe Lord Thorne ordered your father's murder 7 years ago." "I believe it firmly." Harrington drummed his fingers on the desk. Helena had brought copies of the most incriminating documents, not the originals, which remain safe in their 3 locations, and the editor had examined them for the last hour with the meticulousness of a surgeon. "Lady Helena," he said finally, "what you have here is extraordinary. If it is authentic, it would be the biggest scandal since the Suez Canal affair. It is authentic. I don't doubt your sincerity, but you understand I cannot simply publish accusations of this magnitude based on documents presented to me by the daughter of the alleged victim. My lawyers would crucify me. Thorne would sue me into ruin." Helena had anticipated this objection. "I am not asking you to publish accusations. I am asking you to investigate." She pointed to a specific document in the pile. "This shipping log indicates a cargo of Martini Henry rifles left the port of Liverpool for the Goluenning coast in March 1807, declared as agricultural machinery. The original manifest must be in the customs archives. Verify it." Harrington examined the document. "And if I verify it? Then you will have the first piece of independent evidence. And from there, you can follow the trail. Every document I have given you points to other documents you can obtain by legal means. Bank records, testimonies from port employees, commercial correspondence. What I have is a map. You can walk the territory." The editor fell silent for a long moment. Helena could see the conflict on his face. Journalistic instinct fighting prudence. The possibility of a monumental story against the risk of personal destruction. "Your father was a good man," Harrington said finally. "He helped me when no one else would have. I owe him. I owe him for that. I am not asking you to pay that debt. I am offering you the story of the century. You are also offering me a war against one of the most dangerous men in England." Harrington leaned back in his chair. "Thorne has friends everywhere. In Parliament, in the police, in circles I prefer not to name. If I start investigating him and he finds out, he will find out. It is inevitable. The question is whether you want to be the journalist who exposed the greatest criminal conspiracy of the Victorian era, or if you want to spend the rest of your career wondering what would have happened if you had the courage to act." It was blatant manipulation, and they both knew it, but it was also true. Harrington studied her with eyes that had evaluated thousands of sources over decades. "You are not what you seem, Lady Helena." "No one is, Lord Harrington. That is precisely the story." The editor almost smiled. "Very well." He took the documents and put them in a drawer of his desk, which he locked. "I will begin asking discreet questions. I will verify what I can verify, but I need time." "How much?" "Weeks, perhaps months." Helena felt a chill. Weeks or months was enough time for Thorne to act. "I understand." "And Lady Helena," Harrington stood, indicating the meeting was over, "be careful. Men like Thorne do not wait for the story to be published to respond. If he suspects you are the source of this investigation, he suspects it. He made that clear to me at the Pemberton ball. Then you are already in danger." The editor looked at her with something that might have been compassion. "Do you have a plan to protect yourself?" Helena thought of Edmund, of the extra guards she had hired for Ravenswood House, of the letters she had left with instructions in case something happened to her. "I have precautions." "Precautions do not stop bullets, Lady Helena, nor carriage accidents." The reminder of her father's death was like a physical blow, but Helena maintained her composure. "Thank you for your time, Lord Harrington." I will be waiting for news. She left the Times building with her heart beating fast and a strange sensation in her chest, something between relief and terror. The first piece of the plan was in motion. Harrington would investigate, verify, and eventually publish. It was only a matter of time. But time was precisely what she didn't have. The Ravenswood carriage waited for her on the street with Edmund inside. He had insisted on accompanying her on every outing since the ball, a precaution she hadn't argued against. "How did it go?" he asked when she climbed in. "He accepted to investigate, but he needs time." Edmund nodded gravely. "Then we need to make sure we have that time." The carriage began to move, joining London traffic. Helena looked out the window at the familiar streets, street vendors, children running between passers-by, ladies with parasols, and gentlemen with canes. And she wondered how many of them had any idea of the secrets hiding behind the respectable facades of the aristocracy. Probably none. That was the genius of the system, the absolute conviction that the privileged could not be truly evil, that lineage guaranteed virtue, that appearances reflected realities. Her father had believed in that system, and that system had killed him. "Edmund," said Helena without taking her eyes off the window, "I need to ask you something. Whatever happens, if something happens to me, if Thorne decides I am a problem he cannot ignore, I want you to promise you won't abandon this, that you will take the investigation to the end, no matter the cost." "Helena, promise me." Edmund fell silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I promise, but I am not going to allow anything to happen to you." Helena finally turned to him. "That isn't in your hands, Edmund, nor in mine." She took his hand and squeezed it. "The only thing we can control is what we do with the time we have, and I choose to use it to destroy Sebastian Thorne." The carriage continued its way through London, taking them back to Ravenswood House. Somewhere in the city, Lord Harrington was beginning to make the first calls. Somewhere else, Sebastian Thorne was likely receiving reports from his spies about Helena's movements. And in the office of the Times, documents that could change the course of British history rested in a locked drawer, waiting for their moment. The race had begun. Chapter 11, The Castle Collapses. The first sign that something had changed came 2 weeks later in the form of a seemingly innocent article in the financial section of the Times. Helena read it 3 times during breakfast, her heart accelerating with every paragraph. The article, signed by a special correspondent, reported irregularities in export records at the Port of Liverpool during the period 1865 to 1869. It mentioned discrepancies between declared manifests and actual cargoes, and cited anonymous sources within the customs office who were concerned about possible systematic violations. There were no names, no direct accusations. But for someone who knew what to look for, the message was clear. The investigation had begun. Edmund entered the dining room while she reread the article for the 4th time. "You saw it," he said, more a statement than a question. "Harrington is being cautious, establishing basic facts before aiming higher. Do you think Thorne noticed?" As if answering the question, the butler appeared in the doorway with a silver tray. "Milady, this has arrived for you. The messenger said it was urgent." Helena took the envelope. The paper was of the highest quality, without identifying marks, and was sealed with black wax bearing no emblem. She opened it with hands striving not to tremble. Inside was a single sheet with 3 lines written in elegant calligraphy. "The journalist is a minor obstacle. You are the main problem. You can still choose to withdraw. This is my last offer of courtesy." There was no signature, but she didn't need one. "Thorne?" asked Edmund, reading over her shoulder. "Who else, Wahi?" Helena folded the note and put it in her pocket. Her first reaction was fear, the visceral, primitive kind that made hands sweat and stomachs contract. But beneath the fear was something else. Satisfaction. Thorne was worried enough to send threats instead of acting directly. That meant he still wasn't sure how much she knew or how deep the information went. "I need to accelerate the process," she said. "Harrington is being too cautious. If I give him more documents, more direct evidence—" "Helena, Thorne just threatened you explicitly. This is not the time to be reckless." "It is exactly the time." She stood up from the table, breakfast forgotten. "As long as Thorne believes he can intimidate me, he will keep using threats. If I show him threats don't work, he will have to choose between acting openly or retreating. And acting openly against the sister of the Grand Duke of Ravenswood, especially now that there are journalists asking questions, would be political suicide. Edmund followed her toward the study, or he could decide an accident is preferable to a public scandal. It's a risk I have to take. No, Helena, it's a risk you chose to take. There is a difference. She stopped dead and turned to him. What do you want me to do, Edmund? Flee? Hide in the country while Thorne destroys evidence and buys witnesses? Let father die twice, once physically and again when everything he worked for vanishes into oblivion? I want you to live. Edmund's voice cracked. I want my sister to be alive in a year, in 10 years, in 50. Justice for father means nothing if I lose you too. The silence that followed was dense with unexpressed emotions. Helena looked at her brother, this man who had carried the weight of the dukedom since he was 26, who had lied for her for 5 years, who had waited patiently while she played the most dangerous game of her life, and felt something break inside her. Edmund, she said softly, I am not going to die, I promise you. You can't promise that. I can promise I will do everything possible to survive. And I can promise you that if something goes wrong, it won't be because I acted recklessly. Every step I have taken has been calculated, including confronting Thorne at the ball. Helena hesitated. It was the only moment she had questioned. The only instant emotion had clouded judgment. Including that, I needed him to know I wasn't afraid, that he couldn't intimidate me with looks and presence. It was a risk, yes, but a necessary risk. Edmund studied her for a long moment. Very well, he said finally. Then let's do it right. What do you need? Helena felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost made her cry, but there was no time for tears. Now, I need you to organize a meeting with Lord Blackwell at the Home Office. Not to present evidence, not yet, but to prepare the ground. If Harrington publishes something significant, I want the government ready to act. And you? I'm going to visit someone who has been waiting 5 years for this conversation. Edmund frowned. Who? Helena took her cloak from the rack by the study door. The person who has the third set of documents. The person who, after me, has the most reasons to want to see Sebastian Thorne destroyed. Helena! But she was leaving, her steps echoing on the foyer marble. The Ravenswood carriage waited outside, ready to take her across London toward an address she hadn't visited in years. Because the last piece of the puzzle wasn't in the customs archives, nor in the offices of the Times, nor even in her father's memoirs. It was in a small house in Hampstead, where a woman who had once loved Sebastian Thorne guarded the secrets he believed buried forever. And Helena was about to unearth them all. Chapter 12, The Flight of the Ravens. The house in Hampstead was modest but elegant, hidden behind a winter garden where rose bushes slept under layers of frost. Helena had sent a note days before, and the reply, brief, cautious, but affirmative, had arrived that same afternoon. Now, as she stepped down from the carriage and walked toward the dark oak door, she wondered what she would find on the other side. Lady Margaret Thorne, née Ashworth, Richard's cousin and Sebastian's ex-wife, had disappeared from London society 15 years ago. The marriage had lasted barely 3 years before she requested an annulment under circumstances never made public. Since then, she lived in this self-imposed retreat, refusing invitations, avoiding social events, existing as a ghost in the margins of a world she had once dominated. Helena had found her 2 years ago during her investigation into Richard's connections. The kinship between the Ashworths had been the initial clue, but what she discovered later was much more valuable. Letters, diaries, and the story of a woman who had seen Sebastian Thorne's true face and survived to tell it. The door opened before Helena could knock. Lady Margaret was 52 years old but looked older. Her completely white hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her eyes, a faded blue that had once been vibrant, studied her with an intensity that belied her frail appearance. Lady Helena, she said, it has been some time since your last letter. It has been a long time, Lady Margaret. May I come in? The interior of the house was warm and full of books. A fire burned in the main salon fireplace, and a teapot steamed on a small table beside two chairs clearly prepared for this visit. "I have followed the news," said Lady Margaret as she poured tea with hands that trembled slightly. "The article in the Times, the rumors about investigations at the ports, and of course your spectacular return to society. Then you know why I am here. I know what you want." Lady Margaret offered her a cup. "The question is whether I am willing to give it to you." Helena accepted the tea but didn't drink. "Lady Margaret, when we met 2 years ago, you gave me documents proving your ex-husband's participation in illegal activities. You also told me what he did to you during your marriage. The threats, the isolation, the absolute control he exercised over every aspect of your life. I remember the conversation. You told me you kept more. Evidence reserved as protection, something he didn't know you possessed." Lady Margaret fell silent for a long moment, her gaze lost in the fireplace flames. "Sebastian never loved me," she said finally. "I married him because my family considered him a good match, and he married me because he needed the respectability of an aristocratic wife. For 3 years I was his elegant prisoner, exhibited in public, ignored in private, threatened every time I showed a glimmer of independence. I'm sorry." "Don't be." The woman turned to her. "Those 3 years taught me more about human nature than all my previous education. I learned to observe, to listen, to seem docile while memorizing every detail. And when I finally found the courage to escape, I made sure to take something more than my belongings." "What?" Lady Margaret stood with slow movements and walked toward a bookshelf in the corner of the room. She removed several books, revealing a hidden compartment behind them, and extracted a metal box which she placed on the table between them. "Letters," she said. "Letters Sebastian wrote to his partners during the first year of our criminal alliance. Letters detailing shipments, payments, and eliminations." Helena felt her heart stop. "Eliminations?" "Sebastian doesn't just smuggle weapons, Lady Helena. He also eliminates problems. People who know too much, who threaten to spy, who stand in his way." Lady Margaret opened the box. "There is a letter here mentioning a meddlesome duke who was investigating matters that didn't concern him. The date is 3 months before your father's death." Helena took the letter with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unmistakably Thorne's. She had seen enough of his documents to recognize it instantly. And the words, "The Ravenswood matter requires immediate attention. The Duke is too close to the truth. Proceed with the permanent solution we discussed. Ensure it looks like an accident." It was the proof she had sought for 5 years, the direct connection between Sebastian Thorne and Alexander Ravenswood's death. "Why?" asked Helena, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you keep this for 15 years without using it?" "Because I was afraid." Lady Margaret sank into her chair. "Sebastian let me go on the condition that I disappear, that I never speak, that I pretend our marriage never existed. I kept these letters as insurance. If he came for me, I would have something to negotiate with. But I never had the courage to use them actively. Until now." "Until now, Shima." The older woman looked at Helena with something new in her eyes, something that might have been hope. "You are different, Lady Helena. You aren't afraid of him, or if you are, you don't let it stop you." "I am very afraid," admitted Helena. "But fear is not reason enough to allow men like Sebastian Thorne to keep destroying lives." Lady Margaret nodded slowly. "Take the letters, use them, and when all this is over," her voice cracked slightly, "when he is in prison, or worse, I want the world to know who he really was. Not the charming Earl, not the respectable businessman, the monster who destroyed everything he touched." Helena took the box and held it against her chest as if it contained the most precious treasure in the world. Because in a sense, it did. Epilogue. 6 Mornings later, the trial of Sebastian Thorne, Earl of Westbrook, lasted 3 weeks and occupied the front pages of every newspaper in England. Helena attended every day, sitting in the gallery beside Edmund, watching as witness after witness took the stand, former employees who finally found the courage to speak, customs officials who had kept secret records for years. And in the trial's most dramatic moment, Lady Margaret Thorne, who identified the letters as belonging to her ex-husband and testified about the years of terror she had lived by his side. Richard Ashworth, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his participation, negotiated a deal with the Crown. In exchange for his testimony against Thorne, he would receive a reduced sentence, 10 years of hard labor instead of the gallows. Helena watched him take the stand, pale and gaunt, and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, not even contempt. Only the emptiness remaining when hatred finally runs out. The widow Blackwood disappeared from London society before the trial ended, rumors placing her in Paris or perhaps America. Helena didn't care enough to verify. Sebastian Thorne was found guilty of 23 charges, including conspiracy to commit murder. The sentence was death by hanging, commuted to life imprisonment after the intervention of several members of Parliament who preferred a contained scandal to a public execution that would generate even more questions. The day the sentence was announced, Helena visited her parents' graves in the Ravenswood Hall family cemetery. Alexander's headstone was covered in moss after 7 years, but the engraved words remained legible. He sought the truth without fear. "I did it, Father," she whispered, kneeling on the damp grass. "It took longer than I would have liked and cost more than I imagined. But I did it." The March wind shook the cemetery trees, and for a moment, Helena could have sworn she heard her father's laugh. That warm, deep sound that had filled the halls of her childhood, but it was probably just the wind. Edmund found her there an hour later, still kneeling before the grave. "Ready to return?" he asked softly. Helena stood, brushing the dirt from her dress. "Return to what?" "To life," her brother offered his arm. "The spring season begins in 2 weeks. Lady Pemberton has asked specifically if you will attend her opening ball." Helena almost laughed. After everything that had happened, 5 years of fake marriage, months of mortal danger, a trial that had shaken the foundations of the British aristocracy, London society continued revolving around balls and gossip. "And what would I do at a ball, Edmund? What all women do at balls: dance, converse, and make everyone present wonder what you are planning next." This time Helena did laugh. It was a strange sound. She had gone so long without genuinely laughing, she had almost forgotten how it felt. "Perhaps I will attend," she conceded, "but only if you promise not to seek suitors, me." "I wouldn't dare. Any man brave enough to court you deserves to discover you for himself." They walked together toward the carriage waiting on the path, leaving behind their parents' graves and the ghosts of the past. The March sun, pale but persistent, was beginning to warm the air, and somewhere in the garden, a bird sang the first melody of spring. Helena didn't know what the future held for her. For 5 years, her entire existence had been oriented toward a single goal. And now that that goal was fulfilled, the horizon stretched before her, vast and unknown. But for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare her. Because Helena Ravenswood had entered a marriage as a shadow and had exited as a storm. She had faced monsters disguised as gentlemen and had survived. She had honored her father's memory in the only way that mattered, with the truth. And as the golden carriage with the 3 Ravenswood ravens moved away down the gravel path, Helena allowed one last smile to cross her lips. The next chapter of her life was about to begin, and this time she would write every page. The end. Have you ever felt like Helena, trapped in a situation that seemed to have no exit? Sometimes freedom comes from fleeing. Sometimes it comes from having the patience and courage to wait for the right moment to act. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes strength is silent, strategic, and absolutely devastating. Let me know in the comments what you would do in Helena's place.